have occupied it before us, and others will take our place when we leave. 100 human dramas played out in every room. Every house in Britain has a story to tell, but in this series, I'm going to uncover the secret life of just one, a single townhouse. A city that rivaled New York in the 19th century, yet 100 years later was one of the poorest places in Europe. In many ways, 62 Falconer Street is an ordinary house, but as I'll show you, in reality, it is an amazing treasure trove. As he leaves them not just £100, but also number 62 Falconer Street.
In March 1885, again, in this house, he grabbed her by the throat and assaulted her.
The life that you can see recorded in these old documents is extraordinary. Delving into the archives, I'll use the personal histories of the residents of this house to reveal the story of Britain over almost 200 years. It's a period of seismic social change, from the early years of Victoria's reign right through to the present day. This episode, a man with a taste for the high life moves in. A couple rise from domestic service to fantastic wealth. And one resident's journey
Behind.
I'm going on the ultimate detective hunt to uncover lives that haven't been recorded in the history books, but which can tell us a new version of our nation's past, a new history of Britain hidden within the walls of a single house. Today, Liverpool is a dynamic city of 500,000 people. And just a mile south of the centre, in a quiet residential district, is 62 Falconer Street. Gaynor is a working mum.
I'll bake it. Be ready for about 6 o'clock.
She lives here with her 2 children, Rosie and Tom. They share the house with a family friend, Kaylin, who has a room in the basement. Gaynor has agreed to let us into her home to see what stories we can find inside it. So Gaynor, how long have you lived here?
We've lived here since March 2010.
Do you know much about its history?
I know that it hasn't always been a single family dwelling. It was flats at one point, but I don't know anything about the people who lived here before us.
What would really surprise you as we dig up the history of this house? What would shock you?
If any crimes had been committed, I think it would shock me and then worry me. But I think whatever history is found becomes part of your history because you lived where they lived and we are walking on the floors where they walked.
Can I have a look around?
Of course.
Thank you.
I'll start by showing you the front room. I think 100 years ago, this might well have been a very formal dining room with a kitchen downstairs.
That's very different from today. The kitchen is now on the ground floor, and there have been lots more changes over the years.
Don't be too surprised, there are not many original features in the living room. There's no fireplace,
So it
no
is
cornicing.
effectively just a white box.
It is a white box,
But
the sash windows make it all right.
They are wonderful. And at the back is a playroom for Gaynor's children. And above that is another floor where the family have their bedrooms. From my first look inside Gaynor's house, I can already begin to imagine how these rooms might have looked in earlier times. And how other people might have lived here when they had oil lamps and open fires. But if I'm going to piece together the stories of those past lives, I need to go back over 200 years to before this house was even built. And Liverpool was a town of just 80,000 people. Joseph Sharples is an architectural historian who can tell me how this street came to be here.
Joseph,
David, hello.
very nice to meet you.
And you.
So what was here before Falconer Street was built?
Well, this area of Liverpool was known as Moss Lake Fields. This is a map of 1796, and here you can see several fields owned by Mr. Faulkner. Winding its way between the fields, you can see Crabtree Lane, and that's what became Faulkner Street.
Right. So when do we think this house was built?
Well, it seems that the house was in existence by January 1841. We don't know how much a house like this would have cost, but maybe in the region of £1,000, something like that.
So this is a home that's financially out of the reach of 99% of the population.
I should think that's true, yes.
By the time this house was built, Liverpool was already one of the biggest ports in the British Empire, and business was booming. The town's new middle class wanted houses away from the slums by the docks, and so farmland on the outskirts was snapped up by developers and built on, bit by bit.
So many of these projects were built individually, and then the rest of the street is filled in around them.
Yes, and this piecemeal development is also reflected in street numbering. This house was originally number 58, but it's now number 62.
Because Falconer Street was built without a plan, houses had to be renumbered as new ones were added. So knowing that this was once number 58 is vitally important as I start my investigation. Records for the early years of Falconer Street are hard to find, but in a private library I've discovered a rare collection of Victorian trade directories. Buried within these pages, I hope, is the name of the very first resident of our house.
This is a copy of Gore's Directory. It's a list of all the traders and the merchants and the business owners in Liverpool. This directory was regularly updated from the 1760s onwards. And thanks to Gore's Directory, we can tell exactly who's living at 58 Falconer Street in the year 1841 because it lists the name Richard Glenton, and it tells us that he is working for Her Majesty's Customs. With the help of a census also of 1841, we can learn a little bit more about Richard Glenton because this confirms that he's 45 years old and that he's not the only person living at 58 Falconer Street.
There is no Mrs. Glenton on the census, but there is someone called Ernst Muller, a clerk who's 20, and a middle-aged woman, Julia Schwind. My guess is that they're both lodgers. There's also a Catherine Smith, who's just 15 years old. The letters FS mean female servant, which means Richard had a maid, as did most middle-class households at the time.
So from these two documents, we can deduce that Richard Glenton was the master of his own home, that he was wealthy enough to employ a female servant, but he appears to be subsidizing his lifestyle by taking rent from two paying lodgers. So it is a bit of a mixed picture.
Richard certainly had room to spare in his substantial new house. The basement would have been where the servant worked, in the kitchen and the scullery. The ground floor would probably have had a dining room at the front and a morning room at the rear, plus a toilet. The first floor rooms are the most expansive. At the front would have been a drawing room and behind it the master bedroom, Richard's no doubt. Finally, on the top floor were the bedrooms, where Richard's lodgers and his servant would have slept. Already, though, this house has thrown up its first mystery. We know it would have cost about £1,000, which was out of the reach of most people. So I wonder if Richard Glenton had taken in lodgers to make ends meet, especially if his job in customs didn't quite pay enough. To find out, I'm following the trail back to where Richard once worked. In his day, these docks were the commercial heart of Liverpool. Ships from every corner of the globe carried millions of tons of cargo in and out of here every year. what was Richard Glenton's part in all this? I'm hoping that Dr. William Ashworth from the University of Liverpool can tell me.
Will.
Hi.
Hi, how you doing? So this is the centre of Liverpool's story, the docks.
Yeah, by the end of the 18th century, early 19th century, Liverpool was beginning to even challenge London as the heart of trade.
What would the docks have looked like when Richard was working here?
Well, I've got a picture here of the Custom House built in 1839.
It was here.
Yeah, if you look just to the left of the pump house, that's where the Custom House was.
And that's where Richard's spending his career.
Yeah, the first record of him is from 1832, and it has him down as a clerk to the register. Now, there are an array of different clerks. They're everywhere. Remember, there's no photocopiers, so these guys just sit there scribbling and copying documents from the Treasury, letters. But it looks to me like he was one of the many clerks that would keep a register of all the ships coming into the port.
So how would Richard have got this job?
It seems fairly clear that his father was instrumental in getting him the job. Now, his father was a land surveyor, which basically means he's one of the top boys working the docks.
This is jobs for the boys. This is not what you know, but who you know.
Yes. The whole of the 18th century is about patronage, so this is not unusual.
When Richard's father, Jonas, started work here in the 1790s, a job in customs was an invitation to line your own pockets. Crooked officials took backhanders to turn a blind eye to smuggling, and thieving was rife. But by the time Richard was a customs clerk, the government had cracked down on corruption and criminality. Jobs for the boys were on the way out. Promotions were to be strictly on merit, and the days of casual bribery were all but over. The epitome of the new regime was the Albert Dock, which Richard would have seen being built in 1846.
So where we are now represents that new professional world that's developing down here at the docks.
Yes, we're in a bonded warehouse. The idea is that the vessel comes in and it's then swiftly offloaded and placed in these warehouses.
There's bars on the windows.
Yes.
The architecture here is specifically designed to stop this Wild West world of corruption and backhanders.
Yes, it's almost like a Victorian prison.
As a clerk, what's happening to Richard Glenton personally?
Not a lot. He remains a clerk. We don't know much about him and his attributes, but he doesn't seem to go anywhere.
There's no promotions, no advancement. He doesn't climb the ladder.
If we're to believe that this is the start of a kind of new world in which meritocracy, for example, is important, I get the feeling he's a little bit inept, a little bit useless at what he's doing.
What does that mean for him financially?
It means he stays at the bottom rung on the wage, probably on a salary of about £50 a year.
A lot more than most people in Victorian Britain, but it's not a lot for somebody living in a very big house on Falconer Street.
No, that makes no sense at all if you're looking at purely at him and his income.
So there's a bit of a mystery there.
There is a bit of a mystery there. Something else is going on.
The mystery deepens when you look at the occupations of Richard's neighbours on Falconer Street in 1841. It certainly tells you a lot about their income bracket compared to his. And the expense of a house like this wasn't just in the bricks and mortar, of course. The interior would have been highly decorated, especially the centrepiece of the house, the drawing room.
I imagine that when Richard Glenton first got the keys to this house, this would have been the room that he was most excited to see. There were catalogues at the time, just like this one. And because Richard was the first owner of this house, he would have had the chance to have selected the cornicing and the other decorative features. And the whole idea was to make rooms like this into statements about their owners, about their refinement and their taste.
The plaster cornicing would have been elaborately ornate, with a ceiling rose in a matching style. And there would have been a fireplace too, marble, I'd imagine.
Having personally selected the decor, Richard Glenton would of course have wanted the furniture to match. Now, incredibly, by going through the back issues of the Liverpool Mail, I found a list of the furniture that Richard Glenton actually owned and had in this room. There's items like a rosewood couch, Trafalgar chairs, and a chiffonier. Now, I am by no means an expert in Victorian furniture, but to me, none of this stuff sounds like it's going to be cheap.
I've given the list to Professor Deborah Sugg-Ryan, a design historian. She's come to the Jeffrey Museum in London to see what she can discover about Richard's lifestyle from the objects in his home.
Here is somebody who has a very fashionable interior. We've got lots of luxurious furniture, expensive fabrics, an expensive carpet too. This is a Brussels carpet here, like Richard. And they were absolutely the most high quality kind of carpet you could get. This is a card table. Richard had a pair of these. You pull the legs out, the top flips over, and lo and behold, you've got a lovely green baize top for playing cards on. I could imagine Richard at this card table, maybe with some friends, placing a little bit of a bet and downing a few drinks. I think, you know, it might have got a little bit rowdy.
The louche bachelor was a favourite figure of fun in 19th century cartoons. So perhaps a night of gambling with his drinking cronies was Richard's idea of an entertaining evening at home. And Deborah's found another eye-catching item on the furniture list.
Richard had a couch like this one. This is mahogany. Richard's was rosewood, which would have been even more luxurious. And to my mind, this is somewhere where maybe Richard would have entertained his lady visitors. The couch is lovely for the female visitor because it accommodates her clothing and allows her dress not to be crushed. And I can imagine him cozying up to them on the couch, poor lonely bachelor perhaps that Richard was.
58 Falconer Street might have echoed with the shouts of rowdy card players and the laughter of female guests, as for 3 years Richard enjoyed the lifestyle of a wealthy bachelor, albeit on the salary of a customs clerk. But I've found a document that seems to mark a dramatic change in Richard's fortunes in 1844. It's his father's will, still stored in the archives of the Lancashire Record Office.
And what it shows is that Jonas Glenton left all his money, his entire estate, to one of his children. And it's not Richard. It's his sister, Eliza.
Eliza was unmarried, so I can see why Jonas wanted to provide for her future. But it speaks volumes, I think, that Richard didn't get a penny.
From this point, everything begins to unravel for Richard Glenton.
That list of Richard's furniture from the Liverpool Mail now makes perfect sense, because it's actually an advertisement for an auction at 58 Falconer Street. But Richard wasn't about to replace all these expensive items. He was selling up and moving out, or, as the notice puts it, changing his residence.
But I think this is the saddest document. It's a page from the Liverpool census from 1861. Now he's living in a much smaller house in Everton, a far less prestigious part of the city.
Richard's departure from Falconer Street, just a few months after his father's death, would seem to solve the mystery of his lavish lifestyle. Richard had been living off the Bank of Dad, and when his father died, the party really was over.
Now, there's a lot of people living in the Liverpool of 1844 who are far more deserving of our sympathy. Richard Glenton's not living in a slum, he's not starving. But I can't help still feeling a bit sorry for him, because he's clearly someone who was a bit of a daddy's boy. But he has been, to an extent, humiliated and been exposed to the harshness, the cruelty of Victorian society.
For him, 58 Falkner Street had been a stage on which he had played the role of a man of means, a role that he never really had the money to pull off.
After Richard Glenton, the next people to move into 58 Falkner Street in 1844, we think, were James and Anne Orr. And James's story starts with a journey.
Liverpool has always been associated with movement and migration. This was the port of entry for hundreds of thousands of people from right across the British Empire and from across the world. In the 19th century, Liverpool was famous for its huge Irish population. But one community who are often overlooked in Liverpool's story are the Scots.
In fact, there were more Scottish migrants in Liverpool than in any city outside London. And James Orr was one of them, born in Peebles in 1814.
Now, he appears in Gore's Directory for the year 1847, and he's listed here as a gentleman. Pretty general catch-all term, and it could mean little more than somebody doing a middle-class occupation. What we do know about James is that he was 33 years old and that 3 years earlier he'd married Anne Waters. So on the face of it, this is a simple domestic story. A nice middle-class couple have got married and they've got themselves a nice house. But there's one detail about James and Anne that just doesn't fit that simple story, because their marriage certificate lists their profession as servants.
We think that James and Anne may have moved into 58 Falkner Street as early as 1844, because as a rule, a big step up for most Victorian newlyweds. But for two former servants, it seems almost miraculous.
It's quite easy to imagine James and Anne Orr sitting here in what, after all, was their living room, enjoying the fact that they could pour cups of tea for their guests rather than the guests of some employer. So how on earth did this couple manage to change their fortunes so radically? We know from the records that both James and Anne had fathers who worked as labourers, and there's almost no chance that they inherited any money from their families. And this document, the Liverpool census from 1841, shows them both working as servants in the household of Richard Earl. Now, he was a wealthy barrister, but there's absolutely no evidence that he left this couple any money or property. So you're left to conclude that this scene of this middle-class couple pouring cups of tea for their guests in their nice new middle-class home, that all of that was down to their own efforts and their own ingenuity.
The hunt for clues as to how they managed it has to start, I think, with James and Anne's time in the service of Richard Earl.
Richard Earl's household is really quite substantial. He's got 8 indoor staff and 1 gardener. I think we can assume James Orr is probably something like a butler, because he is the oldest male indoor servant. He's 25, which seems young now, but in those days would have been relatively old in work experience terms.
It's easy to imagine James serving dinner guests or polishing the silver. But a butler, in the truest sense, was much more than just a manservant.
As a butler, James would also have run the household accounts, so he must have been both literate and numerate. Someone who has skills of managing other people, in James's case a staff of 8, would have had talents which would have been very useful in all sorts of jobs in the outside world. And the most obvious one is going into the hotel business, into guest houses, innkeeping, and a great number of servants, including Mr. and Mrs. Claridge, who set up Claridge's Hotel in London, had come from service.
So for James, butlering was perhaps like an apprenticeship in business management. And he must have already taken up a well-paid job when he and Anne moved into this house in 1844, we think. But it's not until the next census, 7 years later, that we are finally able to discover what James was doing that enabled him to live on fashionable Falconer Street.
This document tells us that his profession by then is Master of Newsroom. I think today we'd presume that this is a journalistic job. But if you were involved in the world of business in the 19th century, you'd instantly recognise this as a managerial job in a gentleman's club.
Liverpool was becoming ever more prosperous in James Orr's day, and grand new buildings were being erected to cater for a growing professional class. Gentlemen's clubs were places of business and leisure, and there were many, including the Rotunda, where James Orr worked. The Athenaeum is one of the last survivors from the city's Victorian heyday. The current master of the newsroom is Vincent Roper.
Vincent,
Good evening.
good to meet you.
Welcome to the Athenaeum Newsroom.
Thank you very much. Wow.
Impressive, isn't it?
Vincent, what would a newsroom in a gentleman's club have been like in the middle of the 19th century?
Not very different to this. We'd have had newspapers, there'd have been a bar, there's always a bar, and a big conversation going on all around us.
People reading the newspapers, talking, having meetings, discussing business.
Yes.
Newspapers and magazines were then the only mass medium. There were over 50 titles in London alone, and clubs like the Athenaeum would have had the latest editions sent up overnight by train to meet the demands of their news-hungry business clientele.
Thinking about James Orr, do we know what sort of man was recruited, what sort of skills they looked for?
One of my predecessors, Mr. Roscoe, the master in 1851, wrote down everything they're looking for.
The master of the newsroom should be an active and intelligent man.
Don't look sceptical about that.
He should be between 30 to 40 years old. If married, so much the better. So they want stable men, family men.
Yes.
So to have got this job, James Orr was clearly a man of some
Of sound
capacity.
character. He wouldn't get it otherwise. Sounds very conceited from my point, doesn't it? But that's the way it goes.
In the archives here, they still have an original list of duties for the master of the newsroom, which include everything from collecting fees to lighting fires.
Most chillingly, it says his duties start at 7 o'clock in the morning.
Yes, but it also they finish at midnight.
So he runs this enterprise all day long,
He's
from
the
7
manager.
a.m. till midnight.
He's a manager. He is responsible for everything that goes on in here.
James Orr would probably have earned around £250 a year, 5 times what Richard Glenton earned. But his job offered much more than just a good salary.
So James Orr will have known pretty much everybody in Liverpool who was significant, anyone who's a major businessman.
Yes, Liverpool was maybe one of the richest cities in the world at that stage, and they would be coming in his club the same as they would come into the Athenaeum.
So he has the ear of the most powerful men in the city.
He would have a lot of influence with them as well. They would tell him things, they could ask his opinion. So you have the contacts if you want to use them.
And James clearly did make the most of his position. By 1850, he and Anne could afford a larger house on Falconer Street at number 28. And I've found evidence of him taking on new, prestigious roles in the world of finance. The details are in one of the same papers that would have been in James's newsroom.
In 1860, the Liverpool Mercury reports that James Orr is a trustee of the Harrington Permanent Building Society. 7 years later, the same newspaper notes that he's the treasurer of the South Lancashire Permanent Benefit Building Societies. Now, these societies were one of the great financial and one of the great social innovations of the 19th century, and it seems that James Orr is involved from quite early on.
Building societies began as savings cooperatives for aspiring homeowners. They were so successful that the number went up from 250 in 1800 to almost 3,000 by 1860. James had acquired the skills and the contacts to join the ranks of trustees and treasurers, managing other people's money. But I think he saw that the new housing market held opportunities for him as well.
This isn't a man who's involved in this world of finance just for these glamorous titles. I think he's using his growing knowledge to build his own fortune and change his own story, because this document from 1874 shows that James Orr is an investor in 18 houses just across the Mersey in Birkenhead.
Birkenhead was a property hotspot. The demand for housing had skyrocketed, thanks not least to the growth of the Laird shipyard, where the latest steamships were being built. But there's more to admire in James Orr than just his eye for a shrewd investment. These same newspapers from the 1860s show that he was collecting funds for local charities. One that was vaccinating children and another that was helping women trapped in poverty.
By any standards, the life of James Orr, the life that you can see recorded in these old documents, is extraordinary. He was somebody who found himself in 1844 a servant, a man on the wrong side of a social barrier that millions of people, no matter how hard they tried, could never even dream of crossing. And yet, when James dies in 1881, he's able to leave his widow Anne the sum of £16,000. Now, there's lots of different ways that we could estimate how much that sum is worth today, but the most conservative of those estimates puts that amount as being worth around £1.5 million. The transformation of the life of James Orr and his wife Anne, I think, began in those years in Falconer Street. And what his life demonstrates is that for the very luckiest and the most talented, Victorian Britain could be a society in which there were phenomenal levels of social mobility. This is a journey from the parlour and the kitchen to the boardroom. This is a life transformed.
A transformation was going on in Falconer Street as well. When Prince Albert visited Liverpool in 1846 to open the Albert Dock, he toured the city's finest sights, and his carriage passed right by 58 Falconer Street. It was then still part of a new development on the outskirts. But by the 1850s, there were many more houses on the street, and the owners an even broader mix of Liverpool's up-and-coming middle class. After James and Anne Orr, we know that a shipping agent called Alexander Gillespie lived here briefly in 1851, and a single woman, Isabella McNeill. Then, in 1853, the records show two new residents, Eliza and Wilfred Steele.
Looking at these documents, it's possible to come away with the impression that Eliza and Wilfred Steele are just another young couple moving into one of the posh houses on Falconer Street. But if you look a little bit closer, you realise that isn't the case at all, because Eliza isn't Wilfred's wife, she's his mother. He's just a bachelor, 25 years old, and she is listed as the head of the household. Now, this is another document that helps us paint a better picture of the relationship between Eliza and Wilfred, because this is the will of Wilfred Steele's father, and he dies when Wilfred is just a baby. So the impression that you come away with is of a woman who's brought up her son by herself, of a protective mother, and of a young man who's going out into the world to try to make his fortune. The question is, what is the profession that he's chosen in which he's going to make this fortune? Well, I found this tiny clipping. It's from a Liverpool newspaper called the General Advertiser from 1851, and it's an advertisement for an auction that's going to take place at the premises of the company Bourne and Steele. Now, this document, to me, casts Wilfred Steele in a new light, because what it tells us is that the commodity in which he is trading is the most profitable, It's the most risky, but it's also the most controversial commodity of the age, because Wilfred Steele is a cotton broker.
If the docks were the commercial heart of this city in the 19th century, then cotton was its lifeblood. 250,000 tons of raw cotton passed through the port of Liverpool each year, destined for the giant mills of Lancashire, which produced almost half of all the world's cotton cloth. Most of that cotton came from the slave plantations of the American South. So although slavery had been abolished in the British Empire, it was still at the core of the business that Wilfred Steele was in. It was a business worth £70 billion a year in today's money. And it put people like Wilfred at the top table of Liverpool society.
This is the very first time I've been able to look into the face of somebody who lived in our house on Faulkner Street. Because this figure on the horse, this is Wilfred Steele.
His likeness hangs anonymously in the Walker Art Gallery, where it's been for the last half-century or so. I've been able to identify this as Wilfred Steele from a history of Liverpool's early Victorian painters, published in 1904. Wilfred was a friend of the artist's wealthy patron, but there's no other explanation for why he agreed to pose. The picture is an imaginary scene inspired by a Scottish ballad. The woman, Helen, is pregnant with her lover's child, but he will not give up his ride for her, and she's forced to walk alongside his horse across the Highlands.
This painting was produced in 1856, so Wilfred was in his 20s, and he was by then fully established as a cotton broker in Liverpool. So this is how, at the moment he has risen to middle-class status, he allows himself to be portrayed as this cruel and callous character from literature.
Perhaps Wilfred didn't care about the meaning of the painting. Perhaps it was enough for him to know he was now mixing in the highest circles. As a cotton broker, this square would have been Wilfred's place of work. It's where all of Liverpool's wealthiest businessmen would gather to make deals. I'm meeting Dr. Nigel Hall to find out exactly what Wilfred would have been doing here.
Nigel.
David.
Hi.
Lovely to meet you.
Really good to meet you. So although we're outside in the open air, this is a trading floor.
Yes, here we have a picture of exchange flags in 1847, and we can see these splendid top-hatted gentlemen around the memorial. Networking is a phrase we use today.
So these frock coats and the top hat, that's like the Versace suits of the mid-19th century.
Absolutely, yes. You've got to look the part, you've got to look like a merchant. Someone like Wilfred Steele, we know he comes from quite humble backgrounds. Yet he's here parading the flags with the wealthy, looking like the wealthy. It's all part of the image for an up-and-coming and aspiring cotton broker.
Exchange Flags was Liverpool's Wall Street, at a time when the city was a serious rival to New York as a centre of trade. And the young Wilfred Steele was poised to make a fortune.
So he's in the business elite of one of the most dynamic cities in the world.
Yes.
It must have been immensely exciting.
Incredibly exciting. And particularly this time in the 1850s, when the cotton industry is roaring ahead and booming and people are making huge profits, he must have thought he was made for life. It looks like a safe bet buying cotton.
And what happens?
It's not a safe bet. One Sunday in late 1857, a ship arrives with news from America. And that news is the banks have closed, there's a run on the banks, the stock market's crashing, the price of cotton is collapsing. Come Monday in Liverpool, and the market opens.
All hell breaks loose.
Turmoil, pandemonium. They can't even quote the price of cotton. Within weeks, the price of cotton falls by 40%.
So Wilfred Steele, a bright young thing, what happens to him?
Anybody holding cotton ruined in that situation. And on the 6th of November 1857, Wilfred Steele is listed as being out of business.
He's gone bust.
It looks that way, and it gets even worse for him. On the 10th of November, we find Wilfred Steele has been sent to Lancaster Jail, and that's a debtor's prison for Liverpool.
So 1 month he's a cotton trader, a city trader effectively. The next month he's literally in the nick.
He's finished, absolutely finished.
It must have felt to Wilfred like a very long fall, from the comfortable surroundings of Falkner Street to the harsh confines of Lancaster Jail. And anyone sent to a debtor's prison in Victorian times would have had to stay there until they cleared their debts or reached a deal to have them wiped out. Wilfred Steele suffered this terrible reversal of fortunes. I imagine he's feeling sorry for himself, and I think he has reason to. A Victorian debtor's prison is an appalling place. I really wish I could feel sorry for Wilfred Steele, but I don't. The cotton bales that land in Liverpool, the last hand to have loaded them onto a ship in New Orleans is that of a black person who is a slave. It's a profession that's steeped in blood and exploitation and evil, and he's part of it. It might be a worthy fate for Wilfred to be languishing in jail, but I need to know how long he was there and what happened to him next. I'm hoping I can find the answers in Liverpool Central Library, which houses the city's record office.
Laura, hi.
Lovely to meet you. I found Wilfred after he left jail, so he clearly managed to pay his way out eventually. And in 1859, he's living in Percy Street in Liverpool, which was actually his mother's address. And he marries this widow, Marion Elizabeth Clegg.
A widow at just 28.
And she was a widow because her husband...
So Wilfred's life had taken some dramatic twists in just a few short years. From Falkner Street to jail, then back to living with his mother at a new address, and now married. Marion Clegg's first husband, Edward, had been a pharmacist. He had died of scarlet fever in November 1858, leaving Marion with 2 young daughters. Wilfred married her just 4 months later and settled with his ready-made family in the new industrial town of Widnes, 12 miles upriver from Liverpool. But there's a final piece in the puzzle of this hasty marriage that Laura has managed to uncover, and it links Wilfred, his new wife, and her first husband.
What's really interesting is that Edward Turnbull Clegg was in debtor's prison at the same time as Wilfred.
Right. So he's married a widow with 2 very young daughters, and their father was someone he'd met in prison.
Yeah, that's what it looks like.
It's a bit EastEnders so far.
Yeah. Well, maybe he was doing the chivalrous thing and looking after this young family that he's taken pity on. We've got the family together on the 1861 census. But interestingly, Wilfred's occupation has changed. He's now a clerk in the chemist's trade.
He's really stepping into the shoes of her dead husband.
Basically, yes.
It's all a bit dubious.
You wonder whether it's opportunistic, but...
It seems like he's trying to begin his life again.
Yes, exactly. And there's a young son there as well, Wilfred Augustus, who's 7 months old.
So Wilfred and Marion have had their own child now.
It looks initially like things are looking up for the family, but very sadly, on the 7th of October 1861, Wilfred Jr. passes away.
Right.
He was exactly 1 year old.
Died on his birthday.
He died on his birthday, yeah.
It's a pretty terrible blow for Wilfred.
Yes, it must be. Wilfred Steele registers the death. That's actually the last record that we have of Wilfred in the Liverpool area.
Right.
Whatever hopes Wilfred might have had of building a new life had turned to dust. And if he had now left Liverpool, I worry what that meant for his young family.
I have managed to find a couple of records for the 2 stepdaughters, Marion and Frances. They're in Kirkdale Industrial School. We've actually got a picture of it here. It was this huge institution just north of the city, built because the workhouse is getting so overcrowded. They wanted to move as many children as they could.
Workhouse,
Yes.
where the children of the destitute end up. So this isn't looking good.
In the 1860s, Kirkdale held over 1,000 children in overcrowded and squalid conditions. Boys learned trades like tailoring and shoemaking. Girls, like Marion and Frances, were trained for domestic service.
So we actually find the girls here in 1862.
Where are they? Here we are.
Yeah, Steele. So there they are listed under their stepfather's surname.
So they're here because they're orphans.
Well, this tells us that their stepfather had gone to America.
So he's left his children.
He's left them, and yeah.
He's gone to America. What's the date?
September 1862.
So he's gone to America in 1862, in the middle of the American Civil War. And he's left his children behind.
There's nothing in the Kirkdale records to say what happened to the girl's mother, Marion, so her fate is a mystery for now. But to find that somebody who'd once lived in this house was in the United States, in the midst of the bloodiest conflict in its history, is astonishing. By the time Wilfred was there, in September 1862, America had already been gripped by civil war for more than a year. On one side were the southern Confederate states, who had gone to war to defend the rights of slave owners. Opposing them were the northern states, fighting to save the Union. Although Britain was officially neutral, in Liverpool there was strong support for the southern states because of their historic link to the cotton trade. I think the cotton connection is what's taken Wilfred to America in the midst of civil war. And if I'm going to find out what happened to him, I've got to go there too. Richmond, Virginia was the capital of the Confederacy, and 30 miles outside the city is Petersburg National Battlefield. The Union and Confederate armies fought each other to a standstill here for 9 months, with tens of thousands of casualties on both sides. And there is evidence that Wilfred Steele was here, more than 3,000 miles from Liverpool, as the battle for Petersburg began. Civil War historian Harry Jones has the information I'm looking for. Harry.
How are you?
Good to meet you.
My pleasure. Good morning, Dave.
This is a beautiful landscape. It feels like a park.
This is a park where we commemorate history, but it's not a park where we play.
The last time Wilfred Steele appeared in the record, we discover that he's in America. What's he doing here?
Well, when he comes here, he establishes a business on Wall Street.
He's in New York.
Cotton and Tobacco, 91 Wall Street.
Steele and Harthill. So he's back in the cotton trade?
Yes. Then in August of 1863, he enlists an artillery regiment, the 5th Light Artillery.
There he is.
In the Union Army.
The Union Army?
In the Union Army.
I have to say I'm surprised, because my fear was that Wilfred Steele, cotton broker, had come to America and that he joined the Confederate Army to fight for slavery rather than against it. My worst fears about Wilfred have not been realized.
Well, I'm glad to be the bearer of that good news.
Wilfred Steele, a man who had made his living from cotton produced by slaves, was now standing shoulder to shoulder with men like these, in the Union Army, fighting against slavery. In fact, around 50,000 British volunteers fought in the American Civil War, most of them on the Union side. You see, what I want to believe
is that he's come to New York where there's a big black population, and he's had a conversion, a moral conversion against slavery.
Well, merchants in New York at this time tend to be pro-slavery, so he's really not in that atmosphere. But on Wall Street, near where his office is, you have these brokerage firms who, for rich men, find substitutes for the draft.
So you pay somebody to do your military service.
That's correct. Many immigrants would actually enlist as substitutes.
So this is probably more about money than morals.
That's where the evidence leads me.
So it looks as if Wilfred wasn't fighting against slavery because of his conscience. And if he was, in effect, a mercenary, he was risking his life in a war that left 650,000 dead. At Petersburg, they've reconstructed part of the Union line where artillery units like Wilfred's were based.
So what was it like being a soldier in the Civil War, manning these sort of defenses?
On a day-to-day basis, your biggest concern is actually sharpshooters.
Snipers.
That's what we'd call them today.
So if you're in an artillery regiment, like Wilfred Steele was, it's very easy to get killed.
Well, Wilfred Steele, his life is a little better than the average artilleryman.
Right.
He's not a gunner. He's not on the guns. He is a quartermaster sergeant. He's accountable for all the equipment that you have in the artillery, but he's not a frontline soldier.
So he's not out here exposed to fire, keeping his head down.
This is correct. This is a letter from an Englishman who's a part of the Union Army as well, James Horrocks.
So this is one of Wilfred's colleagues.
And when he writes home, he talks about this quartermaster, a fellow Englishman, Wilfred Steele.
The orderly and the quartermaster and sergeant and myself sat down to beefsteak and onions and coffee and bread. Tonight, we're going to have some stewed oysters. If you're an infantryman down in the trenches, you're not sitting down to stewed oysters and beef. You're eating rations out of a tin in the trench.
The privilege of a quartermaster sergeant.
Privilege is the word.
So having abandoned his wife and stepdaughters to their fate, and having signed up to fight in a brutal civil war thousands of miles from home, Wilfred Steele has nevertheless managed to land on his feet.
It is a bit of a charmed life, isn't it?
If you have to go to war and you do not have the angst for shooting your fellow man, Wilfred Steele's life is the life you want.
I mean, part of me thinks, good for him. You do find yourself finding, at least, maybe not in his character, but in his story, something quite remarkable.
Yes.
The war ended in 1865 with victory for the Union Army. Wilfred was, of course, on the winning side. By this time, he was 37 years old, so still a relatively young man, having to make a big decision about his future. I wonder if he thought about returning to Liverpool, or if the news had reached him that his wife, Marion, and her eldest daughter had both died of tuberculosis the previous year. His youngest stepdaughter, Frances, was now an orphan. If I'm going to find out what Wilfred did decide to do, I'll have to look at the American records.
5 years after the war, Wilfred is still here in the United States. He settled in Philadelphia on Poplar Street, and he is with Emma Steele, his wife.
Emma?
Yes.
His wife?
Yes. Wilfred, in 1869, marries an Emma F. McGlathery.
He still describes himself as a cotton broker.
Yes. And he has a son born in 1871, Milford.
Milford Steele.
Yes.
So another new life.
Exactly. He's definitely starting over again. But sadly, Milford dies at 9 weeks.
So the second time in his life, he's lost a baby boy.
Right.
And do we know much more about what happens to Wilfred?
We do. He died March 23rd, 1873.
42 years old.
Yes. He dies of phthisis pulmonaris or tuberculosis.
He dies of the same disease as the woman he married. and stepdaughter that he promised to care for. So this is where the story ends for Wilfred.
For Wilfred, it does, yes.
For 42, it's a full life. He's had 2 families, he's lived in 2 countries, he's been to war, he's been in prison, he's been a bankrupt, he's been a businessman, and he passes away in Philadelphia, a long way from Liverpool. I think if you gather all the evidence that I've learnt about the life of Wilfred Steele here in America and you put it alongside what we already knew about him from his time in Liverpool, what emerges is a man with an incredible gift for reinvention. Every time he seems, despite adversity, to land on his feet. And yet it's impossible to look at death certificates for children who faded away in workhouses, of a wife who dies in her 20s abandoned, and not conclude that what Wilfred Steele's life demonstrates is the flip side of all of those virtues that the Victorians admired, the virtues of self-help, an inner drive and a determination to make it in business, because the flip side of those virtues is ruthlessness. And I think you get that in spades in the life of Wilfred Steele.
So far, I've only looked into the first 15 years of the history of this house. But the stories I've already uncovered could hardly have been a more vivid reflection of their time.
What all the first residents of this house had in common was that they were strivers. They were people who were trying to rise up the social ladder. And for each of them, this house represented everything that they aspired to: comfort, wealth, status, and respectability. But if you take all of their stories together, what they lay bare are the forces that were then sweeping through Victorian society in the 15 or so years after the house was built. Because at that time, the old world of patronage, upon which the very first resident of this house, Richard Glenton, had so heavily relied, that was being shaken to its foundations. And the new forces, trade, finance, the forces that had propelled the careers of James Orr and Wilfred Steele, they were the forces that were going to change the future of this city and this house in the decades to come.
Next time, a deadly disease strikes Liverpool.
The residents of Falconer Street must have thought they were going to be safe.
I think the sense would have been none of us are safe up here.
The dark shadow of domestic abuse.
Alfred Robinson dragged her by the hair of her head and violently assaulted her in this house.
And an unexplained death.
But the police still don't know what's happened.
No.
That's the mystery.
That's the mystery.
House Through Time continues next Thursday at the same time at 9 o'clock here on BBC Two. Next night, we're live at the Apollo. On the bill from Liverpool, Chris McCausland, and New York-born Desiree Birch, with your host and abridger of 50 Shades of Grey, Dane Baptiste.
People didn't attempt the surgery a few years ago. It was too scary.
They got the chest open, you just see the heart sat there. Quite an extraordinary thing. It is life right there.
The unseen heroes at the cutting edge of medicine. Surgeons at the edge of life. Starts Monday at 9 on BBC Two.
You've heard of Bitcoin, the digital currency that appears to conjure up money from nothing. But on Newsnight, we'll look at the other wacky speculation going on in the world of cryptocurrencies. It's been called the dot-com boom on steroids. Why is it so bedazzling to shareholders? That's tonight, 10:30 on BBC Two.
Someone in Moscow wants to hurt the family.